Good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Blue Ribbon Podcast. This is episode 250, Fire Without Fuel. Can the AFFTRA ignite real change or will it burn down the industry? I'm going to have a guest on tonight that has a lot of experience with the regulatory apparatus and the understanding of how government works and how, if you really want to achieve this $5 a mile, $1 a mile broker caps, 371 compliance, how that has to be, how that has to happen. Um, Audrey's having a little bit of technical difficulty right now. She'll be along here in just a minute. I want to be abundantly clear from the beginning so that everyone understands clearly what the mission and motivation here is. Audrey reached out to me a couple of weeks ago. I was getting ready to get on an airplane, leaving BCO days in Louisiana, and I saw this email pop up, and she tells me about her experience, and she'd looked things over, and I instantly knew that she was someone that was going to have information on this topic that would make some things clear for us. So I want to be very clear that the mission of Blue Ribbon Logistical Solutions is to provide information, mentoring, and training to people who want to be owner operators. Our target audience is the first time truck owner. That's who we're after. Our motivation is to contact and interact with that 5% that actually watches a whole video on TikTok. We want desperately for there to be success for people that want to be an owner operator. But we're very clear that it's not easy. It is something that is very difficult to do. And it requires 100% commitment from you in order to be able to survive and to thrive as an owner operator. So my motivation in having Audrey on to cover this topic the way we're going to cover it is that I want those people who are thinking about taking that step to become an owner operator to understand that they need not be distracted by this movement to completely modify how the trucking market works. We're not going to talk about the economic consequences of this, of which there are many. I'm going to seek out someone to come on and talk about if this thing were to get through. It's not, but if it were, what would be the economic consequences to not only the trucking market, but to the general market of goods and services around the globe? What we're going to talk about tonight is the basic legality and constitutionality of this movement, because I want people to stop being distracted by this. This is not going to improve your life. This is not going to fix your problems. This is not going to do anything to improve your profit as a truck owner or operator or a company driver. The only things, or the things I should say, that are going to make you more successful, either as an employee truck driver or as a carrier, as a fleet owner, as an operator of a truck, is your attention to detail, your service to the customer, your service to the broker or agent, whoever it is, your communication, your relationship building, your knowing your numbers. You are the hero of your story. There is no other person that is going to come along and pave some way for you that is going to fix the problems that you're having. If you're having problems, they're you are the problem. So the very minute that you can look in the mirror and say, okay, my business is struggling, now I need to identify why it's struggling, and I'm going to measure and check all of my decisions that I've made up to this point to see if that's the problem, and then we're going to find ways to move forward. So let me try to bring in Audrey here. It looks like she might still be having issues with video, but can you hear me?
I can hear you. I apologize. I think we're having a good old fashioned Montana early winter storm. So I think that might be part of our technical difficulty tonight.
Okay. Well, we're going to suffer through and do the best we can. This won't matter to the people listening on the podcast feed because they can't see anything anyway. So, um, I would like to start with you just kind of giving your background um, kind of what you outlined to me in the email that you sent me when you found, I guess you found a TikTok that I had made, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, so I'd been sent a TikTok that you had made, and that's why I commented on it. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Northwest Montana. My dad was an Air Force captain. My mom was a CPA, did bookkeeping for truckers and loggers and all that up and down our corridor there in Northwest Montana. And I really grew up in a family full of advocacy. I was a blue collar kid. My very first job was running up and down trees, knocking off limbs and getting them ready to load on log trucks to take to local mills for processing. So I really kind of grew up with that blue collar group. And I watched in the 80s and the 90s as the timber industry was kind of crushed by environmental movements in our state and in the Pacific Northwest. And so my parents got really involved in the timber movement, obviously. And when I graduated high school, I really wanted to be a timber sales forester. That was my life's ambition. And I was told, by my high school guidance counselor, that wasn't going to happen. That was just not even a practicality because the industry was dying. And that was the unfortunate just reality of what was going on in Northwest Montana at the time.
Audrey, let me
When
let me stop you for a second. Since we're not having to worry about audio or video, can you try to move the phone closer, um, if you
Yeah,
can? But
is that better?
let's see. Well, what's unfortunate is there's a little blip in the signal, and it sounds like you turn into an alien for just a second, and then switches back to your regular
To
voice.
my to my normal voice? No, I understand. Hopefully that's a little bit better.
Why don't you try to disconnect and come back and
Okay.
see if maybe we can get it to reset.
All right, sounds good.
All right. So that's a first. I've not interviewed any aliens before. Um, and so I want to know who sabotaged her internet connection. Okay, I'm gonna come and find you. Um, I'm just gonna let me switch over to my email, and I'm gonna just read to you what she sent me. Um, let's see. It's a PhD candidate in American law and policy. Says 25 years of professional experience in constitutional law, political structure, statutory authority, and regulatory integrity. I'm just going to read from this email because it's great. The AFFTRA proposal appears to draw inspiration from the 2011 We the People petition platform launched under President Obama's Open Government Initiative. That program, which ran until its discontinuation under the Biden administration in 2021, demonstrated that digital petitions can be a powerful tool for civic expression. However, it also revealed the limits of executive responsiveness. Even petitions with over 100,000 signatures could be acknowledged but not acted upon, and none had the power to compel or create an executive order. Without institutional commitment, such petitions remain symbolic. From a legal standpoint, the AFFTRA Act attempts to leverage Congress's authority under the Commerce Clause to regulate interstate freight and trucking. While the creator claims it will be an executive order, it is not plausible. Many provisions, such as increased broker bond requirements and transparency mandates, could be plausibly legislative in scope. However, several elements raise concerns. The proposal to create the fire agency via executive order exceeds Article 2 powers unless Congress delegates such authority. Mandated rate floors, such as the $5 mile minimum and the 30% gross revenue share, violate the due process and takings clauses. Additionally, automatic penalties for wage theft, including license suspension, would violate the most basic constitutional rights under due process. Although the act does not appear to directly violate the First or Fourth Amendment protections, it does raise constitutional issues. Creating enforcement powers without congressional approval violates the non-delegation doctrine. Rate mandates and market share limits violate the Fifth Amendment as they restrict private enterprise. Moreover, enforcement mechanisms must include appeal rights to avoid arbitrary deprivation of licenses or access and ensure procedural fairness. To ensure grassroots advancement, it's crucial to understand that the federal system prohibits direct ballot petition initiatives. Citizens need to petition Congress and obtain a bill sponsorship from a member. At the state level, ballot initiatives require meeting signature thresholds, adhering to filing deadlines, and undergoing legal review, typically by the Secretary of State or Attorney General. There is no mechanism for a citizen petition to ever create an executive order. In conclusion, the AFFTRA Act reflects ambitious reform goals and contains several basic constitutional violations. To be able to create something like this, it must have enforceability and constitutional resilience based on careful statutory framing, clear delegation of authority, and robust procedural safeguards. And she says, it's funny how things come full circle. This is exactly the kind of work that I do professionally through my firm, Montiva. Oh, there she is. Let's try this again.
Is that better?
All right. So that, and I kind of read what you put me in the email there for the audience so they could see that. So let's try again. Pick up from there and take off.
Yeah. So, I mean, you kind of read what the overall context of the email was. And like I said, I come from a strong activism background. And I think this is a really ambitious idea. I think that there's some education that needs to be done on kind of how the process works. And I think that's where a lot of this, I think if a person wants to pick that up, I think there's the education component is what's missing on that and just how the process works. Unfortunately, it isn't just as simple as going out and creating a petition. If you want to use the petition to rally support around your cause, absolutely you can do that. But to be able to create a executive order off of that is not plausible.
Yeah, I mean, it's been shown over the last 10 or 20 years that unfortunately the American public probably could not pass an 8th grade civics test, separation of powers. The executive order has kind of become a magic wand. It's if I like the guy that has the wand, well, then I want him to, just write those executive orders faster than he can get his hands on them. If I don't like the guy, then I want him nowhere near an executive order. And so we have this very toxic back and forth where one group at one time wants there to be executive orders to suit their needs, and then the other group says, "Oh, no, we can't do that." But then when their guy gets in, they start doing the same thing. Obviously, there are serious economic consequences to a market manipulation of this size. I mean, you're essentially taking the freight rates and doubling them. What I've seen looking at the market reports and different metrics, the average rate per mile on the spot market is about 225 right now. Well, if you take the entire industry's rates and you double them overnight, and you say that you have to do that because bread and milk cost too much, ladies and gentlemen, what do we think is going to happen to the price of bread and milk when we double the freight rates overnight? It's a recipe for disaster. And like I said, I want people to understand that if you're waiting to start your business or improve your business or find better ways to do business until you're going to get a minimum rate floor of $5 a mile, please don't do that. I want you to start doing the things that are going to improve your business today because you're the only one that's going to do it. Could you talk a little more in depth about the constitutional side of this? Because I think the Constitution kind of gets forgotten here. Could you talk about, especially the Fifth Amendment part? I thought was interesting.
Yeah, so I think I just wanted to go back and touch a little bit on what you were saying about executive orders. And this is something I think people really need to understand. And it doesn't matter if you're trying to pass an executive order on trucking or on milk or on Barbie dolls. The fact of the matter is the executive orders are only as good as the person who writes it. So in other words, if we passed an executive order that said whatever about trucking, and again, that's not my area of expertise, so I'm not going to say that to even
Hmm.
go into that. But what I'm going to say is that say we pass an executive order that all semi trucks have to be the color red, right?
Hmm.
And our president signs that into to office, and that's the executive order. Every truck has to be red. The minute that president comes out of office and the next president comes in, he says, well, I don't like the color of him or her. I want everything yellow. Then we have to do that. Executive orders are only as good as the person who writes them. Yes, there is some times that executive orders will stand after that administration, but that's very rare. And one of the other things to think about is when you're asking for executive orders, you kind of put a target on your back. So I'll be honest, we have some potential political presidential candidates who are thinking about running in the near future who are not pro truck, period. They do not
Hmm.
want semi trucks on the road at all. So if you start kind of poking the bear, as the old adage goes, the very first executive order that they may see on their desk says, oh, we're going to have this rate or this rate or this rate. And they're like, well, guess what? You guys decided to poke the bear. I want all trucks off the road immediately. So we've got to
Hmm.
be really careful when we're presenting legislation or we're presenting these ideas of executive orders, because there's this thing called unintended consequences. Not only is there a whole discussion about unintended consequences on the economic side, there's also unintended consequences on the political side, which A, you're putting a huge target on your back. People are going to pay attention to what's going on in your industry now. They're going to start really, clamping down on compliance in other areas. And so when you want to make these strategic political moves, you've got to really kind of find out, it's a cost benefit analysis, right? Like is the ends, is the end goal that I'm trying to accomplish worth what could potentially happen? And that's another thing to think about is that we've got to be really careful. And again, it doesn't matter what we're talking about politically or what, we've got to be careful of those unintended. And I've been doing this for a lot of years, and I see a lot of times lawmakers on state, local, federal levels go, "Oh, we want to do this," and I actually saw a law in my own state years ago in the legislature that actually violated FMCSA rule. Because they're like, oh yeah, you really don't have to strap your loads down because that takes extra time that we don't want to spend. And so then state law came into conflict with federal law. And you would think, well, that just seems like nonsense. Well, yes, but again, we don't understand those unintended consequences. The only way that my state figured that out is when the federal highway traffic, federal highway guys go, well, if you're not going to follow FMCSA, we're pulling your highway funding. Well, in my state where it's big open highways, that became a big issue. And we're like, oh, yeah, we're probably going to veto that. So we've got to be really
Right.
careful, even with these misnomers about we're just going to run in there and we're going to do something quick, because if we're not careful, that could come back and really bite somebody in the butt. So I want to make sure that that's understood too, is that executive orders, like you said, they're a really powerful wand and they can do some great things, but they're only as good as the wizard who's holding it. Once the wizard gets the wand taken away or he's replaced by a different wizard, it's kind of a free, it's the Wild West again. So I wanted to touch on that. The Fifth Amendment. Yeah. So this is interesting because, that Fifth Amendment, we are probably all really familiar with that in regards to like, I plead the fifth or criminal law or things like that. But the thing about it is that when we start asking for a political answer and say, hey, we want to find someone, we want to remove somebody's way to make a living, we want to do some of those things, we've got to be really careful because people have constitutional rights. And a lot of times we overlook that for our own personal, I want this or this for my own personal benefit. So when we write legislation, when we come up with ideas, we got to make sure that that's done. And that's a really fundamental thing, is because we can't say, well, if I don't like the way you conduct your business, whether it's the background color, or I don't like the fact that you're only talking about trucking and not about gardening, I shouldn't have the right to sue you because I don't like that. You have the first, you have the First Amendment, the right to free speech. And then there's this thing of, but I don't like it. So I want to punish you for that. And I want fines and jail time and all these kinds of things. That is really tough because then that gets into a totally separate realm of not just legislation. Now you have to have enforceability and you've got to make sure that a person has their day in court, right? So if you're going to say those things, what is that going to do to other agencies or other forms of government, aka judicial, um, to enforce that? So there's a lot of components that go into that. And again, it doesn't really matter if we're talking about trucking or gardening, those same rules still apply. And it all goes back to you don't know what you don't know, right? Like we all think that we all look at things through a very specific set of lenses. And so sometimes we get lost in those lenses and we don't go, oh, hey, there's this constitution, there's this Bill of Rights, there's administrative law, there's this agency, that agency, there's my state law, there's my local law, and there's all of these components to that. And we just don't know what we just don't know. And I don't fault anyone for that. It's just an education process. I think that
Mhm.
people really need to understand. I think you mentioned that most of us don't remember, our eighth grade civics test. I don't think any of us, how many of us can remember what we learned in our senior year of government class in high school? I can tell you, I can't, and I have a degree in this stuff. And I'm like, gosh, did we even cover this stuff? I think I had to make a poster about who the president was at that time was the only thing I can really remember. So we've just gotta go back and say, hey, if we're gonna do this, or we're actively going to engage in activism, or we're actively going to engage in the political process, we just have to know how to do it. And I will be the first person to admit the government on any level does not make it easy for the average person to engage. That's just fact. They make it as complicated as possible. They say, hey, call your senator. We're going to take your phone call. You want to know who answers the phones at those places? 23-year-old
Interns.
kids. Oh, yeah, 23-year-old kids with political science degrees. And I tell everybody this in every single presentation I give across the country. Tell people it doesn't matter that you have two senators from your state and how many ever Congress people and there's a president and there's the Supreme Court. Our country is ran by 23-year-old kids with political science degrees. And the reason why I say that is A, I was one of them. I will totally own that. And I worked for congressmen, I worked for senators for a number of years. And what happens is you would call in and you would say, hey, I'm really interested in talking to Senator ABC about this issue. And I'd like, okay, and you are. And I'd write your name down and I'd say, what do you want to talk to him about? And you're like, well, I'm mad about XYZ. And I'd write XYZ down. And then I'd take up the next phone call and I would do the same things. Mrs. Jones called about the oak tree on Elm Street. And I would keep writing. And then the next morning, when I met with the congressman or the senator, we would say, hey, what did we hear yesterday in the office? And I would be like, we got 5 phone calls about various things. And they would look at you and say, well, does one of them have more, are more people calling about one thing than the other? And you're like, yeah, no, it's just 5 various things. If you can't convey or you can't get to a person who's a decision maker or somebody who you can have those conversations with, those phone calls are wasted. You've wasted 5 minutes of your life you're never going to get back. And that
Yeah.
I think is the most important thing for people to take away is that if you're going to engage in the political process, the unfortunate reality is you kind of have to learn the jigsaw Jumanji way of getting through to your government because it's not simple. It's not as simple as you just drive to the store, pick up a loaf of bread, pay for it, and come home. It's way more complicated than that.
One of the issues. Well, let me try. So two things. So, and I used this example the other night. In 2001 in September, there was a big event that happened, and one of the things that we discovered uh, in that event was that there were people that perpetrated an act, and they had fake IDs. Right? They uh, there was a problem in understanding what or who it really was, right? And so at that time there was a very robust discussion about there being a national ID, but there's no constitutional framework for a national ID That's one of the enumerated powers reserved to the states. And so we came up with, or they came up with, the Real ID Act of 2005. Now, people that's been paying attention over the last 6 months should know about the Real ID Act of 2005 because they heard a lot about it as some of its um, uh, it was coming into. I'm losing the word here, but it was coming into force. Right? You can't get on a domestic airline unless you have the gold star. It's been 20 years, and they still have not gotten all of the provisions of the Real ID Act of 2005 into place. So again, I'm back to the distraction. Even if the government had the power that you think it does, and even if you got it to say, you know what, truck drivers, we hear you. We're going to enforce the laws that are on the books, which is what they're talking about in the comment section right now. They have a very twisted understanding of 371.3, and they've decided that that's like the magic bullet. Oh, we're going to get that to happen, and then all of our problems are going to go away. But even if the government heard you, did the executive order, created the new office, you're going to be out of business long before. If this movement is needed, this legislation, this executive order is needed to save your business today, you're going to be out of business long before it is ever put into place, because government moves at the speed of smell. They'll get around to it when they get around to it. You've probably seen, since you've dipped your toe in this water, a lot of talk about immigrant drivers, H-1B visas, non-domiciled CDLs, and these headlines come out. Oh, we removed 170,000. We removed 200,000. I don't believe a word of that. The amount of enforcement, cops and ICE agents and federal agents, hell, the Army, that it would take to find or identify, find, and then round up 170 to 200,000 people, I don't believe exists. Now, I think they're probably saying, "Oh, well, if we write these words down on this paper here and we vote on them, or we enact this executive order, then the 170 or the 200,000 are going to be gotten." But I don't believe that. And so again, if immigrants are the reason that your business is suffering, and you need 170,000 or 200,000 or however many number of immigrants that you've identified as the reason that your business is not profitable, and you need them to go away, again, even if you get what you want, your business will be dead long before that actually happens. So, could you talk a little bit about that process? Because we see so many times an announcement, a bill has been sponsored, right? Or a bill has been introduced. And I honestly think that people think that that when a member of Congress or a state government introduces a bill, it's done. Oh, well, they introduced a bill, but the process is so much longer.
Absolutely. It takes you, and you're absolutely right. I like to say that government moves at the speed of molasses in January in Antarctica, because that's literally how long it takes. It takes forever. One of the things, you're right, I want to touch first on the real ID thing. So there was lots of constitutional argument, and there still is, about the real ID violating the 10th Amendment. So it talked about state sovereignty, and they've talked about how, it violates the right to travel and the interstate commerce clause and the right to do all this. And those arguments still haven't been settled, but most of us have just went, fine, I'm gonna go get the stupid star on my driver's license. I'm done being distracted by that. I'm just gonna go do whatever I need to do to continue to do my business, or I'm going to go do whatever I need to do to travel or get my kid back and forth to college, whatever it is. We just take care of business and we move on, right? The other thing that I have kind of went down the rabbit hole on, and it speaks to what you were talking about enforcement of what was on the books. If we
Mhm.
enforced what was on the books right now, would we even be having this conversation? I mean, that's
Oh,
that is a that is the converse that is huge to say, is that would we be having this conversation? Because I've read, I had a great person give me a copy of their green book, and some women get to read romance novels at night, and I like to prep for my presentations, and I read the green book. And let me tell you, as somebody who's not in your industry, I called that person and was like, "Hey, what about this? What about this? What about this?" And that person, you know what that person told me? They said, "No, welcome to our industry. It contradicts itself here, and it contradicts itself here." And I'm like,
yep.
"Okay, so it wasn't just me." That kind of made me feel good, because I'm like, I kind of feel like I'm reading this thing that goes around in a circle. So there is that. But then I went down this road of, I'm like, okay, so I'm hearing from drivers, I'm hearing from brokers, I'm hearing from all these people saying this and this and this, and I'm like, all right, so let's go. I'm a statistics, I'm a logic girl. I like to just deal in facts. So what I did do is did go to the FMCSA website, and I looked at their complaint roster. So basically, anybody who's lodged a complaint against somebody else in your industry about a violation of something in your green Bible, as I've been told it's called. So I found some interesting things. The first thing I found was, and the data is on the FMCSA website. Anybody can go look this up. The first thing I found was interesting was, from 2019 to 2025, there were no complaints against brokers that yielded any sort of monetary recoupment. So I thought that was interesting, number one. Number
Okay.
two, number two thing that I found was interesting, and again, this is not my world, I just deal with data, is that there was less than 2 dozen complaints about carriers. So whether that be, um, carriers were not operating with um, more specifically to loads, or shipper carrier issues or things like that. The complaints, the vast majority of complaints were carriers in compliance. Looks like compliance issues with FMCSA, which kind of didn't surprise me. But I
Right.
thought it was interesting, because I'm like, wait a second. If there's all this talk, and I've went down the trucker TikTok road quite a bit the last few weeks, kind of just wanting to kind of get a feel of what was going on. And there were two things that really stood out to me. Number one, the amount of bad information that is out there on social media for drivers is astounding to me.
Oh,
You know, I
it's
I, I
awful.
read. I read a thing saying, "Oh my gosh, this act passed, and now insurance went from 500,000 to, I think it was 1.5." And I'm like, "Wait a second. I haven't heard that from my ag guys." And trust me, my ag guys would tell me if their production costs went up. And I'm like, "Well, maybe we missed it." And I went in there, and when I went in and just did a basic search, I just Googled, or even just put it in Google, they're like, "Oh yeah, that died in 2021."
Yep.
And I was like, "So why are we sharing this information? Why are we getting drivers riled up?" And it made me feel, I was sad. Like, it broke my heart, because I'm like, there are hardworking men and women, and I will absolutely back the drivers and people in your industry, drivers, brokers, all of them. There are good men and women in your industry. There's bad people in your industry. I get that. That's true across the board. But what breaks my heart is that these people are depending on these platforms for information, and they're not even getting accurate information. They're not getting good information. And so that was the first thing I noticed. The second thing is that we kind of post these things that are highly, inflammatory, but there's really no resolution. Nobody is filing complaints with FMCSA expressing these very concerns that I see all over these social media platforms. And I'm like, why is that? Well, it was interesting, because going to FMCSA, they actually, I believe, and please don't quote me on this, it looks like about a year ago, they updated the complaint process to make it easier for people within your industry to file these complaints. If this is an issue, either drivers, brokers, carriers, whatever, need to understand that process, because that process exists within your own industry already. So why are we not using it? I can't answer that question, but I really wanted to point that out, because from my standpoint, as somebody who's not in your industry, if you have the mechanisms, you have two mechanisms. You can go through FMCSA, or you can go straight to DOJ, or you can even take it in civil court, which I've seen a couple cases have kind of came up when I was doing some research. You've got these mechanisms. Again, I think it's an education issue. I don't think it's a policy issue. It's an education issue. And again, that's coming from somebody outside looking in.
Well, that's 100% accurate. I've been in this industry since 1997, and then and now, this industry trains they're barely able to drive a truck when they get done training. Like, um, the and it's I think the truck driver training should be, you know, 6 months long or a year long. It should be an apprenticed kind of trade. But, they send them to a 2 to 4 week school. They put them in a truck with someone that's been driving 6 months, and then they turn them loose. And then unfortunately, they believe everything they think, and then they start clustering in groups at what we call the horseshoe of knowledge, just like a liar's counter at a truck stop. And they the just wild conspiracies and it just feeds on itself. And then the barrier of entry is so low to get an MC number. And I'm not a guy that believes in restricting anything, and I mean anything, right? Guns, drugs, sex, whatever. I don't believe in restrictions or regulations on anything. Okay. But I look at this process where you, Audrey, could go buy a truck and a trailer, fill out some forms on a website, buy a piece of insurance, get a CDL, and go haul freight. I mean, just
No,
just
nobody
that
wants that.
easily. Yeah.
Nobody wants that. That'd be terrifying.
Right.
And I've had people this week tell me just that. They're like, we could get you into a truck. You could get through it. You're kind of smart. You could read some books and you could do that. I'm like, me personally, that absolutely terrifies me. Not that I'm a bad driver. I mean, I don't have a huge, but I think about it when I'm in my pickup truck and I'm pulling my horse trailer, my smaller horse trailer, and I'm like, there is no way I could do what these ladies and gentlemen do. Like, no way. Like, I get frustrated and I'm like, what are you doing? And you're stopping in front of me. And I'm like, I've got livestock in my trailer and it's slamming up against the trailer. And I'm like, I can't imagine the burden that puts on drivers. Like, it's terrifying to me. Like, I was like, there's no way any of us would want me to have a CDL and to be doing that.
Did you spend any time on looking at the 371 compliance?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll be honest with you, I don't feel really comfortable enough in that area to really kind of weigh in on that. My position on that would be this. I think those of you in this industry need to be having these conversations, whether it's within your trade organizations, whether it's within conventions or associations or whatever. I think that I will always say this, and I see this with my ag guys, and I see a lot of similarities between my ag guys and that is that we have the sod busters against the cattlemen, and we kind of have this old west kind of thing. And I kind of see that even with your industry is we've got this us against them thing. And I think at the
Mhm.
end of the day, there's a whole lot more commonality than there is extremeness. And I'm not saying we're all going to agree on everything, but let's come together and let's have conversations. And this would be my advice. Let's come together and have conversations about things we know we can fix. Let's have a conversation about why is the trucking industry not being heard in Washington D.C.? Why are people who are not in your industry having and leading this conversation? If you're not telling your story, someone else is going to tell it for you. And I can tell you right now, the people who are telling your story know less about trucks than I do, which I know nothing. I
Mhm.
know nothing. And I will admit that. But when I'm looking at your lobbyist or I'm looking at people who are introducing legislation, I'm like, what's your experience? And they're not guys with the level of care and heart that I think a lot of these drivers and a lot of these people that are trying to do whatever are doing. And I think that if y'all could come together, and I know this is hard, but you all sit down and have conversations and agree on a few things. It may not be this document, it may not be that document, it may not be whatever. If you look at what you have and say, okay, we all can agree on these compliance issues, or we all can agree on this portion of the Bible, or we all can agree on this whatever, and then you work from there, I think you're going to get a lot farther than this us against them thing. Again, outsider looking in.
Yeah, what so the whole 371, part 371 is titled Record Keeping Requirements for Qualified Financial Contracts. And 371.3, what they're honing in on is it's, and I'm looking for it. It says somewhere in here that everyone is entitled to see um what's in the contract. The problem is there's basic privacy, and I think what somebody should do is take this and challenge the constitutionality, by the way, of this rule. The FMCSA, the entire book is rules. They're not laws. You know what I mean? They're not um they're rules. Okay. And basically um they are written so they're rules, and that somebody can find you violating them and then they can find you. Okay. But the issue for me as a truck operator is I know what my cost is, and I look at the market, the supply and demand, and I can use this very strange thing that I'm holding up right now called a calculator. I know a lot of people don't know what these are, but they stopped using these years ago, but I still have one. I'm able to use this calculator to determine what is a reasonable rate. And if it doesn't matter if I'm talking to a broker or I'm talking to a customer, I can say, here is the rate that I am willing to haul this load for. And if they come back and say, I'm not going to pay you that, I say, thank you, have a nice day, and I move on to the next call. But they're wanting a level of force to be enacted. And I've seen in the comments both get rid of brokers, which I'm not going to be a part of turning the government loose on getting rid of anyone, no matter their occupation, no matter their skin color, no matter their race or religion or sexuality or gender. We're not going to get rid of people. Okay. That's not happening. History has shown us when we tell the government to get rid of people, really, really, really bad things happen. So we're not going to participate in getting rid of people. Okay, that's for one. The um the brokers and the shippers, which are the customers, the people writing the checks. Let's back it up that way. The people writing the checks will have the brokers sign non-disclosure agreements that they're not going to disclose to anyone what they're doing. And so the broker's job is to find capacity for that customer. Well, your belief in 371.3 and how you have interpreted it does not override the basic constitutional rights of individuals and businesses to keep their affairs private. So if you want the government to override that basic right to privacy and contracts, probably someday going to happen to you. But when we go back to the fundamentals of business, if you know what your cost is and you study the market to see what the average rates are given the supply and demand of the moment, it doesn't matter what the broker's getting paid. Now, they've, especially this one guy calls himself pontificator, they have spun themselves up into believing that customers are writing massive checks and the brokers are only giving a little bit of it. And I don't see that anywhere else in any other industry. I mean, you talk a lot about agriculture. I mean, my gosh, with the futures that y'all have got to deal with and the markets up and down, and you're trying to figure out if you're even going to make a profit on your crop, even after you've grown it and harvested. I mean, it's truck drivers would be terrified to get in an industry like that. But again, back to the education. People don't know how to read rules. They don't know how to read laws. And then they think it says one thing, and then they've put their flag in the ground to say, okay, well, this is what I believe. And it doesn't matter anybody else telling me any different. This is what I'm going to believe. And now I'm going to go petition the government to change something that the government really can't change.
Yeah, so privacy is such an interesting thing, especially when it comes to business, because okay, so as we know and as been relayed by our government, there's no legal constitution to right in privacy in contracts. However, the right to privacy exists through the amendment. So it's like the fourth and the 14th, and we talk about creating this bubble zone field or whatever of privacy, as they call it. And there was, if you really want to go down that road, there's Griswold versus Connecticut, which is a really famous case about the right to privacy, and there's a right to be left alone. I mean, there's that. But the interesting part is that in the application of contracts, and this I can speak to, not necessarily specifically about your industry, but I'll just contracts as a whole, is we start
Mhm.
talking about personal versus commercial information. And the constitutional right to privacy most strongly applies to personal information, such as private financial records, business records, customer list, because then you are almost are kind of breaching into that. You get into intellectual privacy law and all that, so that gets complicated really quick. And again, I am not a lawyer, so I mean, you could pull 50 lawyers on one of the shows, and they could tell you no, she's completely wrong, and here's 150 reasons why. This is just
Mhm.
my application of that. But the fundamental right to privacy does not extend to terms of most commercial contracts, especially those that talk about interstate commerce. However, contracts generally historically unlikely that talk about regulations would be unconstitutional. So literally even our own legal process creates this really muffled situation for this entire argument, and that's part of the reason why, I am by no means an expert in your industry, so I would not even want to weigh in on how that all looks. But I think again, the most important thing to realize is that when it all boils down, there's this constitution, there's this whole legal field, and you were talking about FMCSA and the rules and all that. So they call that administrative law, where it's like the most basic level. And any of the alphabet soups, the FMCSA, the NTSB, the FAA, the all of the alphabet soup agencies that I like to call them, um, all have this administrative law. Now, the interesting thing about administrative law, and I think this is really important to people who are like, well, this is law, but it's not law, but it's law. If you are challenging something within FMCSA, you get sent to an administrative law judge. That person may or may not actually be a licensed and barred attorney. They may or may not actually have experience within your industry. I'll be honest, I've been called on in my own state to do administrative law work, and I'm not a lawyer. I have not went to law school. I'm like, hey, do you want to come do this? Nope. I want nothing to do with anything that's going to affect anybody's life or livelihood, or, yeah, that's just not a road I
Mhm.
want to go down. But the thing about it is that administrative rules are most of the time made by the agency in which enforces them. So it's kind of like the old adage of the fox guarding the henhouse. And
Mhm.
where I think your industry could make amazing inroads is that let's talk about why are we making, again, somebody who's read the green book who went, but this contradicts this, and I'm driving my poor friends crazy going, this makes no sense. And they're driving down the highway going, yeah, welcome to our lives every day of the year. Um, let's talk about trying to get some transparency and some clarity in the own rules that you have to follow, whether that's for brokers, carriers, drivers, or whatever. Y'all need to understand what you're doing, and you can't have rule 1 that says this and rule 15 that says this, and they contradict each other. So let's make some inroads into that. And again, I think it goes back to education. I think it goes back to taking the time to do that. But at the end of the day, to reiterate your point, we're all in charge of our own. We drive our own truck. We drive our own lives. We do all that. And do you want to do that? Or do you want to spend your time trying to make money? And I think most people are just struggling to make it day to day.
Yeah. Well, one of the as I've gotten to know some brokers that are, really good at their craft. They're really top of the heap. One thing that I had never thought of that they outlined to me is that there's a thing in the industry called back soliciting. So let's say you're a broker and you've got a contract with a shipper, and you hire me as a carrier to come in and pick up your load. Well, if I go into your customer and I try to cut you out, I am back soliciting your customer, right? And one of the issues of integrity that the brokers are trying to protect is the identity of their customer so that they're not back solicited. And we have seen people try to gather people together in a in kind of a closed system and say, okay, well, we're just going to cut the brokers out. Well, you still have to have a broker authority, right? You can't. You're either going to be a broker or you're going to use a broker. You have to have your carrier authority and your brokerage authority. Well, if you're all going to come together under one brokerage authority, and then you start trying to go back solicit customers that you've gotten through the other brokers, you're doing something that is may not be there may not be an issue of legality, but there is certainly an issue of morality and integrity, right? Where you're trying to cut people out from their livelihood and steal their customers under the guise of, well, we're doing the right thing because we're banding all together because we're all carriers. Um, and so that's a moral failing and an integrity issue that really doesn't have anything to do with the law, or the rules as they're laid out in the Green Book. And so I understand the brokers the sacredness or the sacred contract or the sacred bond between a service provider and their customer. Let's not even call them brokers. For example, I was thinking about this. I have a friend of mine that builds multi-million-dollar homes. So he will take a contract with a customer to build a home, and a big one, right? Well, in that industry, much like trucking, they don't have, generally speaking, a lot of employees. They will use contractors. They'll use one for the groundwork, they'll use one for the foundation, and one for the framing, and one for the roof, and one for the siding. And they'll use these different contractors to come in and assemble this thing that is 100% their responsibility, right? They're taking on the risk of the entire project. They're telling the customer, okay, I'm going to build you a house and it's going to be exactly what you tell me. I've told you it's going to be, and you're going to give me this amount of money. And then it's my job to complete that. Well, at no point do the roofers or the plumbers have a right to the terms of the deal between the contractor or the GC, the general contractor, and the customer. It's none of your business. Your business is to come in here and do the plumbing, do the HVAC, do the roof or whatever you're supposed to do, hang the sheetrock, and then go away. It's none of your business what the general contractor is doing. And so as a business operator and an operator of trucks, I don't have any illusion that I have any sort of moral right to call somebody up and say, well, yeah, but what are you getting paid? Well, it's none of your business. It's none of my business. I'm going to do my job to the absolute best of my ability for the rate that I agreed to. And if the broker's making $5,000 on top of that, I couldn't care less. It literally does not bother me in the least because my ability to make money is on me, solely on me. And my ability to provide that level of service to the customer that they need when they need it, where they need it. So, yeah. So I don't know. To me, the whole thing is silly. That this industry, the barrier of entry is so low that anybody can come in and do it. And so when they fail, they look everywhere but the mirror. It's got to be the president or the Congress or the FMCSA or the ELD and the emissions. That was the other thing I was going to ask you about. So you've dipped your toe into this industry. One of the things that I find the most ironic is that in 2017, the federal government, FMCSA, I guess it was, decided that every truck had to have an electronic logging device. And from that day forward, no paper logs with one little exemption carved off. And then in 2004, we were saddled with emissions requirements that went up in 2010 and see 4, 10, 13, 16, and they're trying again. The same people that gave you ELDs and put emissions controls on your trucks that put you out of business are going to be the same people that are going to fix your problem with brokers. That seems very, unfortunately, ironic to me.
Yeah, I think I could talk for hours and hours about emissions, especially, natural resources and ag. We've been dealing with that ABC soup for decades, decades and decades and decades.
Mm.
Um, Again, this goes back to unintended consequences of being on somebody's radar. This goes back to, if you do something, where does that put you? Where does that put a target on your back? What are they actually going to do? And who's telling your story? w- there's a whole the ELD thing and the brakes and the 34 on and off. I mean, that's a whole issue that, I mean, I think there's constitutionality issues. I think there's legality issues. That could be its own separate just diatribe there. Emissions is the
Mhm.
same way. Ronald Reagan had this famous saying that one of the seven deadliest words in the American language, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you.
Yep.
There's a reason for that. That's one of my favorite phrases because you just don't it's kind of like inviting the fox into your henhouse going, "Come in here, we're going to teach you why the chickens are nice and they produce eggs and they do all these things and they do all these great things for you." And then you go, "But," and then they turn around and do the emissions and they do the ELDs and they do the hours of service and they do all of these other things that, I mean, I've seen drivers talking about. And so if you don't, again, I think you're onto something when you're like, the government's not going to help you, they can be your worst nightmare. I would push back on that a little bit and say, we are the government, we just don't own our power. We we have the ability to fix a lot of the problems that we have, and this is across all industries. This is not just trucking. That vote is mightier than the sword, and we have the ability to fix that. We have the ability to vote the people in. We have the ability to go to Washington, D.C. We have the ability to go to Houston. We have the ability to go to Austin. We have the ability to go to Seattle. We have the ability to engage in the process, New York, wherever, and get engaged in these agencies and organizations and change government. I would push back a little bit on that. But with that, there's something to be said for what you're talking about is, do I have the time? Do I have the capacity? And am I going to make this a conscious effort? Or am I just keeping my head down and my nose to the grindstone and I'm just trying to do the best for my family? I can't make that decision for anybody. My decision's been made. I'm in this fight. This is what I do and this is why I do it. But I also don't begrudge anybody who just like, I got to keep my nose down and I need to drive this truck. I need to run my business and I don't have time for politics. And I get that. I really do. I think part of the education process is making it so easy for people to be able to engage that it's, sending an email, it's, doing these types of things. And I think if anything comes out of this petition or this movement, I would hope that's what it is that there's a thirst for knowledge and a thirst for education and a thirst to really try to work together and work on that. But on the same hand, I understand what you're saying is the government is a dangerous entity, and it is. It's kind of like this monster we've created. We've allowed the things to happen that have happened. And so we've got to kind of own that. We've got to kind of go, okay, do we rein in the beast or do we just keep our nose to the grindstone? And those are choices that every single individual in that mirror has to make. I can't make those choices for them, and I can't tell them the right or wrong answer in regards to that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, the my story began as an owner operator in 2011, and I failed in business in 2017. Um, and the epiphany, the thing that set me free and got me to where I am today was the day that I looked up and I went, you know what? This was my fault. Um, I was sitting in a place where I said, "Man, is there anything different that I could have done that would have stopped that from happening?" And oh man, was that a was that a long list of things that I could do different? And then I had the good fortune of being picked up by a guy named Larry Long, who was a serial entrepreneur and a businessman of 50 years, and he showed me how to run a trucking business. And every step of the way, it has always been customer first. If the customer's not first, you're last. You're done. It's over. And he showed me a way to run a trucking business like you would run any other business. We had the nickname the lunatics for the longest time because anybody, just about anybody else in any other industry that starts a business begins with an expectation. If you're going to buy a Chick-fil-A franchise, or you were going to start a construction company, or hell, you were going to be a landscaper, there's like an expectation that you're going to have to work really, 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 really hard, and you're taking a lot of risk. But for whatever reason in trucking, none of that ever applied. And so we were looked at as like these nutball crazy people. What do you mean you buy old trucks instead of new trucks? What do you mean you do this? What do you mean you do that? But we would show along the way, yeah, but what we do works in the down market, it works in the up market, it works in the middle market, because we're just doing the fundamental. Larry used to call it the blocking and tackling. We're just doing the fundamental things that make businesses successful no matter what industry they're in. And I pretty much, because of my failure and the things that I went through, have dedicated myself to the mission of education and saying, look, there's ways to get in business that are really, really risky, and there's ways to get into business that are not as risky. But please understand, you're going to work harder than you've ever worked in your life, and you have to be able to put yourself in second position. And that's what's missing in this broker transparency. The brokers are the problem. You're not even talking about the person who's actually writing the checks. And that's the customers. Like, they're completely left out of this equation. We never talk about the customer. Broker. It's the brokers. What about the customer? What about the people who it is we're meant to serve? And so this whole thing just goes off the rails there. And again, like I said in the beginning, the entire reason that I'm having you on here is because I want that first time owner operator or that business operator to understand that there's probably a list of 30 things that you can do to improve your business and improve your income. And nowhere on that list of 30 is broker transparency and setting minimum rates. Now, I mean, you could put it number 31. That's fine if you really want to believe in it. But there's so many other things that you can do that actually work, that will actually make a change in your profit, in your outcome, in your bank account. Let's focus on those things. We'll have the conversation about if you want to change the rules and laws. Sure, we'll have that conversation. But let's just spend our time working on the 20 or 30 things that you could do tomorrow, regardless of the fact of whether the government or the president has to act.
I mean, I would even push back on that and say, you already have broker transparency. It's in your green book. There's a whole section about it. I read about it. I mean, whether you agree with it or not, or it's not enough or whatever, it's in there. So that's taken care of in your business underneath that. So if we want to adjust that, if we feel brokers are taking too much advantage of us, those are business choices. So if that's your focus, in my opinion, and again, not in your industry, that's already in there. Okay, so we can deal with that if we choose to take on law. But yeah, how are we going to treat customers? And I tell people this all the time when they talk about politics. They said, "Well, gee, you must make a lot of money working in politics." And I will use the same analogy. There are organizations within your own industry who are spending millions of dollars every year on lobbyists.
Oh yeah.
Why don't you ask yourself, if you're a member of any of those organizations, you need to be asking those people, what are you doing on a governmental affairs platform? What am I paying for? You're in DC. What are you talking about? If broker transparency is your thing and you belong to XYZ organization, your lobbyists should be listening to their members. I will tell
Mm,
you right now, most political consultants, individual people that do what they do, um, that do similar things to what I do, are making upwards of 16 to $20,000 a month. You can Google it; it's verified. I'm not blowing smoke up your butt. The fact of the matter is the reason why people like me that don't make a fraction of that is because I'm like you. I believe in what I do, and I believe in giving people the tools to make their own decisions. I can teach you how to get through the Jumanji of the government, but I cannot hold your hand and tell your story for you. I can't do that. I'm not, you were talking about block and tackling. I'm a football mom. I get that
mm,
analogy. I can give you the ball and I can get you to the best football camps ever. And I can get you there. But at the end of the day, you've got to catch that reception and you have to run it in. I can't do that for you. I can give you the tools, but I can't do that for you. So if you're a member of an organization and they have a governmental affairs program, or you're paying for what they call a PAC, a political action committee, I would be asking
mhm.
those people, hey, I belong to XYZ trucking organization. What are you doing with that money that I'm paying you? Ask those questions. If it's broker transparency, if it's carrier relationships, whatever it is, enforcement, whatever it is, what are you doing to help me for that membership? Again, a business decision. Do I pay this hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars to this organization, or do I take that money and I invest in buying coffee and donuts for a customer or somebody I'm interested in? Those are business choices you have to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I certainly appreciate you coming on. You've taught me quite a bit, to some things that I didn't think about. Do you have anything you'd like to plug for the audience?
I think the thing that I want to plug the most is let's have civil conversation with everybody involved in this. I think that that's something your industry needs. I think this problem isn't going away anytime in the near future. And I think the other thing is that really, if this is something that's really important to you, get educated on the process, understand what that looks like, understand what that kind of commitment is, not only monetarily, but time wise, and what that's going to do to your business. I know several people who have like, oh, I want to do this. And then they're like, whoa, that was way more than I wanted. And chose not to, have those conversations. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on, TikTok, Twitter, all of the things. If you have questions, reach out. I am more than happy to answer questions that anyone has about that. And if it's something you want to go down, we can talk about that. And if not, I totally understand. If it's just a simple question of how do I find the information, by all means, I try to respond to that stuff as quickly as possible. But I think there needs to be conversations with everybody involved in this. I think there's so many things going on in your industry right now, good and bad, that this is just a micro portion of everything going on in your industry.
Absolutely. All right, Audrey, thank you so much for being here. You've been a wealth of knowledge, and we will certainly be in touch at some. Keep watching TikTok because you never know what you're going to learn or not.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Y'all, here's what it comes down to. If you're in business, you've got to figure out where the money's coming from. And it might be coming through a broker, but it's coming from a customer. So our entire business is built around providing the absolute best service that we possibly can to customers, brokers, and agents. Those are our customers. So if you're running a business now or you're thinking about running a business, um, you need to be thinking of ways to serve people better in your communication. Do you have an actual email address, like with your company name in it? Do you have a website? Guys, that stuff is so easy to set up. Do you have a signature in your email? Do you look professional? A lot of people are obsessed with what their truck looks like, but their email presentation doesn't even have a signature. There's no phone number. How is the person supposed to remember you among all of the others? Because every truck that you see on the road, that's your competition. Those are not your coworkers. They're not your colleagues. They're your competition. So what are you going to do today Instead of waiting on someone to do something about broker transparency, what are you going to do today to improve your communication, to improve your relationship building, to lower your cost, to improve your revenue? What are you going to do? Like I said before, I promise you there's a list of at least 20 things, if not 30, that you could do tomorrow that is going to improve your relationships with customers and brokers. You have got to get out of this adversarial position where someone else is doing something bad to you. Now, are you going to run into somebody someday that's going to give you bad information or not give you a clear rate con? Are loads going to cancel? Are things going to go bad? Yes, they are. And it happens every day. One of my foundational principles is if it's not written down, it did not happen. I have every email, every freight bill, every maintenance receipt, and every fuel receipt for every one of our trucks for the last 5 years, and I can call them up like that. Do you have a filing system? Do you have an accounting system? Do you know what your cost per mile is? Do you know what your cost of fuel is? Do you know what your maintenance cost is? If you don't, you're going to have to take a real strong look in the mirror and say, you know what, maybe I'm not running my business well, and that's a big part of my problem. We're going to continue to be here to give you the best information that we can that is based on our experience, good and bad. Because every person in this industry, or in this business, in this organization, will tell you, you know what, boy, I did this really wrong, and I did that really bad, and I learned this really difficult lesson because I did that wrong. I think sometimes you need to ask the people that are trying to step in and be your hero, hey, but what'd you do wrong? Like, can you give me a list of your top 5 failures and how that affected you? And if they have to go start immediately blaming, oh, well, you know, the brokers did this and the FMCSA did that. Yeah, but what about you? Like, have you made any mistakes that you've had to learn from? I don't hear that a lot. You want transparency? You get 100% transparency here, because we'll show you every data point, because we have every data point. So if you see something from any of our channels that is published about numbers or whatever, well, just know that I am a horrible, horrible nerd, and that has like 27 spreadsheets that I go through every week. You can do that too, and we'll help you. But you got to be coachable. You got 2 ears and 1 mouth. There's a whole bunch of you that ought to use one twice as much as you do the other. So this is our mission, to help people that want to be owner operators survive past that 95% failure rate. But just understand, if you come around, we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to make sure that you're actually running a business and not doing some really, really expensive hobby that's going to lead to bankruptcy. Because trucking will destroy you. There's no question about that. We've never hidden the fact that this is a very, 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 very risky business to be in. Just from the danger of driving alone. But the business side of it is very, very dangerous and very, very risky. And if you don't do it well, it will destroy you and your finances and your family. So you really need to think hard about buying that truck, thinking that it's going to improve your situation over being an employee. Remember, an employee, you have no risk. But when you get into business, there's a ton of it. So, so that's it for tonight. This will be a little bit of a shorter episode than normal. We will be back with you next Friday, the 10th. I don't have a topic yet, so I do have one scheduled already for the 17th. And so, we'll see what happens. We'll come up with something in the next few days. But until then, everybody be safe and be profitable.